wants to explain for the committee what it is you all are looking for, and then we can have a discussion.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Steve Brandt. When I appeared before you in April, I think it was, I was speaking for myself. Since then, the entire board has passed the resolution that you've received asking for two specific changes. And I'd like to also introduce, you probably know her already, Kathy Abeni, who is with the Park Board and also Commissioner of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And Pam?
Pamela Gochmeyer, IGR of the Minneapolis Park Board.
So I'd like to start by just reviewing the standards for amending the charter that are, I guess you're sort of operating.
Excuse me, Steve, just a second. Let me ask this. Could you explain for everybody who makes up the board?
Sure. I'm one of two elected members, people elected directly by the public citywide. Kathy is a Park Board appointee. The Park Board has one appointee on the board. There are two council members, the council president and the budget chair essentially now, and of course the mayor. So essentially three affiliated with City Hall and three a little bit further afield.
So right now there are six.
There are six, and there used to be, of course, a seventh until the library board
Okay.
dissolved, and I think it was in the plain language revision that maybe the library board seat was taken out as being not applicable anymore. So,
Okay.
so
Thank you.
you have standards for amending the charter, and I went through those and thought about them. First one is germane to the charter, and the amendments that we have in front of you, which would increase the size of the board to 7, elect a third public member, and change the name of the board to more accurately reflect its duties, clearly are germane to the charter. The charter specifies the Board of Estimate membership, it names the board, and the library board seat was removed by charter amendment after the library merger. So it seems the charter is an avenue to accomplish what we want to consider. Is it well considered? Is it explored thoughtfully by the DET? This issue was aired by the board at its last meeting. It has been on board agendas previously. I would say the significant difference between when many of you may have been on the Charter Commission and last encountered this issue is that it was brought in by a single Board of Estimate member, Carol Becker, and this time it's something that's supported unanimously by the board membership at our last meeting on the 22nd of May. We obviously you asked about significant community engagement. We had in our agenda, we did not have significant community engagement. We assumed that that process is part of your process, that you will hold hearings and there'll be further discussion. And is it clear and specific? Yes. It's very easy, I think, to draft this language to accomplish what we want. Does it take away the rights of voters? No, it actually adds to the rights of voters by allowing the voters to add vote on a third seat on the board and who will sit in that seat. Is it consistent with state law? Yes, the Board of Estimate, since its approval by the legislature in, I believe, 1919, had 7 members up until the library board seat went defunct. There's been some change in the membership over the years, but it's existed for most of its history with 7 people. Is a charter amendment necessary to achieve the intended objective? Yes. The charter now says 6 members, and we believe it's necessary to avoid a deadlock. The name change clearly would require a charter change because it is specified in the city charter. I would argue that changing of the name is something that could potentially be addressed, should they so choose, by the city council, if we could find unanimous support and do the amendment on a 13-0 vote rather than put it forward on a referendum. It's not, I would think it would not be terribly controversial. The public now has difficulties recalling the name of the board. I went out and campaigned and talked to thousands of voters, and I would say I was running for the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and I'd get a blank look, and so I described it as the sexiest thing on their ballot this fall, and that usually drew at least a chuckle. But even my neighbors couldn't remember what I was running for. And I think debt and taxes describes the two things that this board addresses, the two duties, formal powers given to it in the charter, and is a much more memorable turn of phrase than estimate and taxation. I haven't done any estimating since I joined the board as a member. So why 7 members? First, it was, as I said before, it was set up with 7 members. 7 is a tie-breaking number. We have tied on some key votes in the past period since I joined the board, which is 3 years ago. For example, the issue of whether to return to a full-time staffer was a 3-3 deadlock between the City Hall portion of the board and the non-City Hall portion of the board. There was also a proposal that I brought forward that I believe would have saved the city money to front-load some of the debt that we ordinarily incur for utilities by selling bonds a year early and beating the interest rate rise that the Federal Reserve had clearly signaled it was going to do and did repeatedly, and then moving an equivalent amount of cash that had accumulated in utility coffers from fees charged for garbage and water and sewer to offset that, and that way you could issue the bonds before the interest rate ran out. You'd have a little bit more carrying cost, but you'd also save the money on the interest. And that didn't pass, and it would have been a tie vote had it gone to a vote. But those are a couple of examples of, I think, important things that have failed because we are the only municipal body in Minneapolis that has a even number of members. City Council has 13, the school board has 9, the park board has 9. Why a third public member? Why would that be the 7th member? I would argue that city council members who sit on the board currently and in the past have some difficulty, given the multitude of other duties that they deal with, focusing on the board's business other than during meetings. And I think that same thing I think is true for Commissioner Abeni, who not only has a full-time job at the university, but has probably a half-time job at the park board, and also is on the Board of Estimate and Taxation. There's not a lot of extra room for her or a second park board member. They're already doing, in many cases, 2 substantial jobs. The cost would be cheap. I work for the taxpayers of Minneapolis for $5,000 a year. That's my salary and parking in the off ramp. And I think I went to one convention last year to check it out. I don't think I'll be back. I know there's been historical opposition to having the Board of Estimate. I have read through the debates. I was reported on those debates. I was around in 2009 when the matter came onto the ballot. The taxpayers spoke pretty clearly that they were rejecting abolition of the board. They saw some value in it. They saw value in having citizen representatives like myself and Samantha Priest-Stinson sitting on the board. And my argument is, if we're going to have a board, let's make it more effective, and let's keep it from getting deadlocked, and let's give the public that greater voice by making that additional member a directly elected member of the public.
Well, thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee? Mr. George?
Chair, thank you for coming today and speaking with us. Just a point of clarification, when you say this is brought by the entire board, all six members of the board concur in these three requests?
All six voted yes for this resolution.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Commissioner Rubinstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple of questions. I probably think that I do think that your proposals make sense, but I do have a lot of questions that sort of, a lot of question marks are left. One is, like you mentioned, two examples of when there's been a tie vote, but how many votes are there altogether? You know, what percentage of those votes would have been the tie votes?
Well,
Say in a
probably
given
like
year.
your body, and probably like the city council, and probably like the school and park board, most votes are not controversial.
Right.
They're procedural, they can be, we've never had a controversy in my 3 years on the board, for example, about approving the issuance of the bonds that our distinguished colleague here brings to the board. So it's a smaller number, but they tend to be the most critical issues that come before the board, in my opinion.
After those votes, is there ability to work through whatever differences there are?
We tried to, in the case of, I'm debating whether to give you the long version or the short version here, but as you may know, the Board of Estimate and Taxation had at least one full-time staff member for basically its first 100 years. Only the fourth person to ever hold that position retired in 2019, Jack Fawley. And he had held the position for 38 years. So when Jack left, there was a lot of institutional knowledge that went out the door. So I was surprised and caught off guard even before I was on the board, when the board did not replace that person with a full-time position. They authorized a half-time position, and matter of fact, we have the first person to hold that position in the room with us, and he was being asked essentially to be a highly qualified finance professional on half pay and no benefits, because the number of hours that were devoted to the position did not come up to the level needed for city benefits. And so Alan rationally moved over to the city finance office for a full-time position and is doing good service for the city there. He was followed about a number of months later by a young person who came in and was highly qualified, I think. Some of you may know him from the political world. His name was Tony Sturrell, the Iron Range individual. And his family ran into a medical issue, and so he also left after about 6 months because he needed health insurance. So there's a history to this full versus half-time, and that's why those of us who were relatively new on the board brought forward the full-time, and to us it was an issue with a history and a fairly significant decision for the board to make. And the deadlocking there, I think, costs the board the chance to go back to a full-time person and rebuild that institutional knowledge that is so necessary for a position like this. And so we then went on, at the mayor's suggestion, to a contract with Abdo Financial, a consulting firm, and they did some of the work that had been previously done by staff. I think Commissioner Benny would agree with me that it was, in the end, adjudged to be unsatisfactory and cost us more money than what a staff member would have cost us. And so we recently decided to explore going back to a staffer again. So that's a long answer to your question, but there's been a lot of attempts to resolve that outside of that one particular tie vote.
Thank you. I have another question. So I also have some institutional memory, having been on this commission for quite a while. And I remember when that vote on the elimination of the DET came up before the voters. And as you said, they were quite, the vote was quite clear that the board was not to be eliminated. But as I recall, it was the very same time, there were two other proposals, and most specifically, there was one to eliminate the park board. And the hearings that we held on those two issues, well, there were actually three, but third one not relevant at this point, but on those two issues, almost all of the testimony at the hearings, aside from members of the BET, was by members of the public, who had been very engaged in the park board issue and had received some misinformation about what the proposal was, let's say. So that feelings were very high. And granted, that proposal didn't even go to the voters. It's only the BET that went to the voters, but it does make me question, whether the vote, what the intent was, and whether people were still all head up because of the park board and so voted against it. And there's no way to answer that question. It's just a little bit of history.
I have some of that same institutional knowledge from having covered those meetings as a reporter. You're right, the park board did attract the lion's share of attention and didn't make it on the ballot.
So it's all to say, I'm not sure, even though the vote was very clear, I'm not sure what the intent of the voters was. And I'm not sure that matters, but it's just something that I wouldn't want to rely on too heavily.
Commissioner Kennedy.
Just a couple of comments. One, in accord with Commissioner Reese, because I was in the city attorney's office at the time this happened, and I recall that there was a great conflation of the park board and BET. And in fact, the park board took the lead on advocating against the BET. You couldn't go into a park center or into a golf course without someone handing you a flyer saying vote against the BET, a violation of the election laws. But our park board saw that as an attack on their financial independence, the other the BET, and that the city would then pull financial strings, which is interesting now, some 15 years later, when the park board gets additional money from the city in order to meet its obligations to keep the parks up. So I agree that to try and rely on that election is a little misleading, because it was really not a vote on the merits of should we have a BET or not. And that raises kind of background on why that happened, is because there was also, besides the Charter Commission, there were members of the City Council that felt that the BET was not necessary, because regardless of what BET did on maximum levy, for example, all of the grief when the budget was passed came to the City Council. And it is, as you mentioned, nobody really knows what the BET does or why they're voting for them. And I would have, as you mentioned, friends who follow the city closely, and they would go, what do I do with the BET? Who do I vote for? That kind of thing. So the other comment I would have on this is, to my recollection, Minneapolis is the only city of the first class that has a board of estimate. In every other city, whether it's St. Paul, Bloomington, Rochester, the city council sets the maximum levy, which is what we're talking about, because they set the maximum levy, then the council sets the actual, what it will be, but it can't exceed that levy. It's a preliminary levy or a maximum levy under statute. But we're the only significant city that I'm aware of, the only city in the state that has a board of estimate taxation. And part of the reason when we went through the plain language charter some years ago was to simplify what was an incredibly complex governance structure in the city of Minneapolis. When they did the plain language charter, they were trying not to do substantive change. But the idea is once we got into an understandable form, then there might be substantive change, as you saw with the executive mayor system. I think a lot of people anticipated that might be another time to take a look at getting rid of BET for the reasons that, this is really a job, at least in my mind, for the city council. We're also the only city that has a full-time city council with 13 members. We also have a full-time elected park board. And so there is certainly a lot of transparency and public access available to people who have concern about the budget. So that's a background, kind of a historical background of why some people want to get rid of the board and why it's still around. If you want to go way back into history in the 1900s when this was done, Minneapolis City Charter at that time was just a compilation of special laws because Minneapolis couldn't get along and the legislature thought the city was corrupt. So everything that should have been done under a charter went to the legislature for them to come up with a solution. And so that's why we have this convoluted government structure that we have that is unlike anything else in Minnesota. So that's the genesis kind of whether it's the Municipal Building Commission, BET, and some of these other committees that we have, commissions that we have. So that's just some comments from kind of another part of the background.
Commissioner Fleck, then
I'm just
you might have something you might want to respond to. So
I'm
go
just
ahead.
confused, Mr. Chair. Are we asking Commissioner Brandt questions, or are we debating as a committee?
This is for comments, and I think Commissioner Brandt, what do we call you, board members, or what?
We discovered that one power we did have was to change our name, go into our bylaws. So, because we had people coming as commissioners, as council members, as directly elected people, and the mayor, we said, let's make everybody commissioners, so you can call us commissioners.
I would have picked a better name if I were you.
It was a compliment.
Well, let's start with Commissioner Flegg, and then you'll have an opportunity to respond to the previous comments.
I would not be in favor of this amendment. I too was around during the time of the prior amendment. I was not the chair of the Charter Commission at that point. I became the chair the next year. But I recall the prior amendment, and I think that the points made in bringing the prior amendment forward are still valid. As has been pointed out, we are the only city in Minneapolis that still has a Board of Estimate and Taxation. At the time in 2009, we also did nationwide research to see what other major municipalities did. And as I recall, there were only like one or two that did in the entire country. Board of Estimate and Taxations were common in the early 1900s, but most modern cities with modern charters have done away with them. And I think that rationale still stands. Second, putting this into place would theoretically mean that 3 public members and 1 park board member could veto the mayor and the city council on matters dealing with debt and taxes. To me, debt and taxes fall squarely within the purview of the mayor and the council. That's what our legislative and executive bodies are for. And I don't think it's appropriate that that public members in the park board should be able to drive the bus. Finally, I would say that city council members are generally well vetted. They run significant campaigns. They engage in public forums that people actually come to. So people know who they are. They are accountable to the people. And Board of Estimate and Taxation Commissioners, with all due respect to all your hard work, are minor candidates. They don't have much of a budget. They generally, they might be opposed, but usually whoever gets the vote of a few hundred DFL delegates at the city convention is the winner. And the public doesn't really know what they stand for or where they are on the issues. the council and the mayor are really the closest representatives we have to the people. And I don't think it's appropriate for minor candidates in minor offices, if you will, to have the ability to overturn the people who we elect to make decisions about our finances, our debt, and our taxes. So, that's my thinking.
Commissioner Brandt.
I imagine that the best way to settle the issue of whether the 2009 vote was dispositive of the people's feeling about the Board of Estimate taxation is for somebody to bring forth a charter amendment to try and abolish the board again. That would, independently of what's happening with the park board, certainly settle the matter. Otherwise, we're speculating. As far as being the only city with a Board of Estimate, either in Minnesota or beyond Minnesota, I think there's an appropriate reason for that, and that is that we're also one of the few cities that has a elected independent park board. And so, because of that, we need somebody to mediate between the city council and the park board if the park board is not going to be a department of city government the way it is in St. Paul and most other cities around the country. And I believe it's appropriate to maintain, if we're going to maintain the quality of the park system we have here now, to maintain a mediating force between the city council rather than have the city council setting those the level of taxation for the park board without any mediating influence. In terms of the DFL endorsement, I didn't get it. I ran for it, and one person got it, 2 people didn't, and that person dropped out, and so that was my path. The reason that the Board of Estimate taxation, if you go back and read the history of legislative record and the commentary from the time, the reason the Board of Estimate taxation was created was frankly because the city council wasn't getting the job done when it came to city finances. Here's a quotation, I believe it's from the Minneapolis Journal, arguing that it's time to have the Board of Estimate taxation because it's time to have an effective budget system in Minneapolis. The part-time council that was in existence back then wasn't doing any rational budgetary planning. And that's why the board was instituted with support of the Civic and Commerce Association, which I presume was something akin to the downtown council or the regional chamber that exists now, with the support of the local newspapers, with the support of strong support from the Senate. And I view it as sort of a populist approach to city government, a problem in city government that injected the public into the equation at a time when the progressive movement was, in the old-fashioned sense of the word, was sweeping the country.
Mr. Clay.
So what you're saying is that it sounds like that the BET was originally formed because we had a crooked or ineffective city council, and the BET was formed to be sort of the backup council.
I would say that if you go back and read the legislative history and the commentary that followed it, I wouldn't say it was a crooked city council. I won't make that case. The indictments of about a third of the city council that happened in the late 1920s hadn't happened yet. And the events that swept Floyd B. Olson to the governorships when he was county attorney. But it was clearly ineffective at the time in setting budgets. And I think the record is fairly clear on that. It was a part-time city council. We had 2 city council members per ward. obviously, a lot's changed since then.
Any other comments? Commissioner Rubenstein?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, as I've been struggling with the name that you proposed, the board, because I'm not sure it would enlighten people anymore as to what the Board of Estimate Taxation does. And so I looked more closely at the charter provisions, and I looked at the charter provisions on the city auditor and the audit committee, because that's a change in the charter from the last time there was a vote. And at the time this issue of the Board of Estimate Taxation came up before the voters, one of the arguments made, at least by Carol Becker, was that the BET serves some sort of audit function as well. And that's no longer true because we have the audit committee and the city auditor. And the other change is that the city auditor had been a function of the city council, and the audit committee was a committee of the city council, and now it's an independent committee and it's an independent auditor under the restructuring that we did. So it occurred to me that there is some value in having other eyes looking at issues such as the budget or the levy and kinds of the extent of debt we want to incur. But maybe there's a way to expand, and I know this isn't before us today, but it's just something I was thinking about. It seems to me that the BET would be more useful if it were part of the audit committee and the part of the independent auditor. And that way you still might have some function, but it wouldn't be the separate function that's very difficult to understand or perhaps to need. And if I could just add, sorry, one other thing, which is the audit committee includes all the different parts of the city. So it's the other venue where different voices come together and need to figure out some way to come to resolutions of issues.
And I have to say, with the passage of time, I would agree with you, or would agree with those that argued for the current system. I think it's a more effective audit regime than what existed under the Board of Estimate Taxation.
Anybody else? Yes,
Thank
Commissioner?
you, Chair. I wasn't planning to speak, I mostly came to observe. But I'd just like to add, I'm also actually the park board's member on the audit committee. So they send me to all the nerdy ones and the ones with the minor positions. Right? But it really, I think the audit function is really different than maybe what you're thinking about. You know, it's not fiscal audit or financial audit.
Right.
It's internal audit. It's very process oriented in terms of process audits, looking at risks to the city, more like exposure and things like that,
Right, I understand.
and function. Okay, thank you. And I just want to clarify too, the park board is not a full-time board. It's not a full-time board. Yeah, okay.
I have a question. It seems, I have no strong feelings about the name change, but what Commissioner Clegg mentioned was something that I was thinking about, and by going to 7, you do change the balance of power on the commission, on the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So I wanted to ask, if you have, you mentioned, Steve, you mentioned a couple of 3-3 votes, so you had a deadlock. Were these, you mentioned, I think, one of them, were these the kind, was the lineup, the city side versus the mayor's council side versus the park board and the public side?
In those 2 cases, yes.
Is that, okay.
Prior to me being on the.
Right.
Okay, right. Well, then it seems to me that, and then how did you work it out? I mean, the levy went out. Or wasn't it that?
We weren't voting on the size of the levy.
Okay.
We did have, we had split votes on the mayor's proposed levy one year, but he had the votes to pass it.
Well, as someone who has some issues with the city council and sometimes the mayor, you know, I think, it's an accident of history that we're at 7, or at 6 right now, because Hennepin County took over the libraries. But it seems to me that maybe a balance between the two entities, the non-council, you guys, I don't know, so you're always in sync, but maybe a potential delegate not that, so nobody gets a leg up. And so that's, I think, one of the things we have to consider. Is there anybody else who wants to make a comment? Is there anybody that wants to make a motion so we decide how to handle this? Or should we move on to the next level, which would be to go to the full commission and decide if we recommend that we ought to take this to the full commission and have a public hearing, or should we put it off and give it some more thought? So those are I think the potential choices, maybe not. So what's the consensus? Someone needs to at least make a motion so we can have a vote to decide what to do. Or in the absence of that, I guess we just move to adjourn and come back later.
I guess I'll make a motion that we table this matter and make a recommendation to the full commission that we would not be moving forward on this issue.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That we would just basically table this and not move forward on this matter at this time.
Okay. So everybody understand the motion?
With the intent to keep this proposal here at the amendment committee?
To keep it here. Table it.
For how long? For what purpose?
To table it, see if there's, at some later point, to table it indefinitely, see if at some point this body wants to bring it back up.
And that would occur when a commissioner presumably at the full commission would suggest, or maybe one of the members here could suggest, let's revisit.
Remember my Roberts, it would be this commission again. A member of this committee would have that opportunity to, at a later date, to ask us to reconsider or to bring that up again.
Mr. Chair, could I just clarify
Sure.
something? If you take the contemplated action that's just been moved, if a petition came forward to put this on the ballot, how would that affect this action if it were adopted?
I will defer to the veterans, Clegg and Ginder, but I think what would happen if a petition were to arrive and it was validated by the clerk, we would have the opportunity here to think whether we liked it or not, but it would be more hortatory than definitive. We have no, once a petition comes, we have no plenary powers over the incident. The city council has the right to actually write the language, but the petition rules, am I correct? Mr. Clegg?
The other thing I would note is that there are other ways to carry this forward. I mean, the city council, if the city council wants to do this, could put it on the ballot.
Yeah, before you came in,
Okay.
Commissioner
Sorry.
Grant mentioned that they could get the 13-0 vote.
That was for the name change. I don't think we get a 13-0 vote for the.
Probably, no. City council doesn't give up power that.
But petition
easily.
is another alternative, and as you point out, Mr. Chair, petition would trump anything that we would do.
Yeah, and we have no power over, this commission has no power over petitions, other than to look at it and give our opinion, which doesn't matter. Okay, any other comments, or then I'd ask the clerk to call the roll.
Do we have a second?
Oh,
Do we have a
No.
second?
Oh, is there a second?
Second.
Yes,
So
Commissioner
to
Coyle.
clarify, an aye vote is a vote to table, a no vote is a vote not to table.
Right. Correct.
Commissioner Booth, Clegg,
Aye.
Demerval,
Aye.
Doherty,
Nay.
Kozak,
Aye.
Rubenstein,
Aye.
and Ginder.
Aye.
We have 6 ayes and 1 nay.
Okay, well, that's, I guess that's, for the moment, that's definitive, so, I don't think we have, thank you, by the way, thank you for coming and for the discussion.
Thank you for listening.
Most appreciated. So I don't think we have any other business before the committee, so I'll entertain the motion to adjourn.
Second.
We stand adjourned.